Back in the days when I used to do community theater, we had a trick that I learned to be able to see in the dark between scenes. If you needed to get quickly to your place on stage during the blackout between scenes, or if you were on the crew and needed to move props or scenery in the darkness, you would stand in the wings, and for about the last minute of the preceding scene, you'd stand with your eyes closed and your hands over your eyes so that your pupils could dilate, and the bright lights of the stage wouldn't constrict your pupils, so that when the light went out, your eyes would already be adjusted and you could see in the dark, right? Well, this isn't perfect, but I think it's a kind of a cool metaphor for what we do during the season of Advent. While the world keeps blasting bigger and brighter Christmas lights at us to sort of advertise this Christmas circus, this holiday circus that the world has put on, we're called to shield our eyes from that light so that we can see in the dimness, so that we can see one candle burning in the darkness. And while the world blasts louder and more jingle bells and Santa Claus hymns at us to remind us that we have to buy things, to remind us that we're first and foremost consumers, we muffle our ears so that we can hear over that din, so that we can even hear the voice of the prophet crying out in the wilderness. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. Now, I know I told you last week that in this year's readings we would mainly be reading from the Gospel according to Mark. And then, of course, this week, here we are in John. What happened? Well, this is a case, we do have John sprinkled through, and this is a case where Mark doesn't have very much to say. This is a Sunday that in all 3 years is focused on John the Baptist, and frankly, Mark doesn't have a lot to say about John the Baptist. So we have the opportunity to hear some of the beautiful poetic language of John in the fourth Gospel. Now, if you listen to this part of the story in John's Gospel, it sounds a little bit different than it does in the other three. The first thing you might notice is that John isn't called John the Baptist. We're so used to him being called John the Baptist that even though it doesn't say it, we probably heard it. But he's just called John. A man came from God named John. And maybe more significantly in the fourth Gospel, John doesn't baptize Jesus. John does a lot of baptizing, and we hear that baptizing is one of the things John does, but he doesn't baptize Jesus. Baptizing doesn't necessarily seem to be the most important thing that John does in the fourth Gospel. It doesn't seem to define who he is. Instead, we hear John came as a witness to testify to the light. A witness to testify to the light. What does that mean? Surely, if this light is shining in the darkness, we should all be able to see it for ourselves. Why do we need a witness to point out something as obvious as a light shining in the darkness? And then the Judeans sent out priests and Levites to ask him, "Who are you?" He confessed and did not deny it, but confessed, "I am not the Messiah." Now, does this exchange seem a little odd to anybody else? This little conversation here? I mean, first of all, there's this convoluted double negative statement. He confessed and did not deny it, but confessed. So he didn't not say that he didn't deny it. You know, it's this, you've got to kind of take it apart, and it seems like the author is setting things up for the big reveal. He didn't deny it, he confessed. Here is what he said, "I am not the Messiah." The big news is that John didn't say that he was not the Messiah, as though we would expect that he was, as though the priests and Levites would expect that he was. What's going on here? And the authorities didn't ask him if he was the Messiah. That wasn't the question they asked. They said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm not the Messiah." They asked him who he was, and he told them who he wasn't. How many of you, if somebody asks you who you are, the first thing you say is, well, I'm not the Messiah? I mean, we need to get that out of the way right up front. You know, it saves a lot of time if we tell people that, but it's just kind of an odd way to answer that question. He answers, who are you, with who he isn't. But then the authorities seem to kind of play along with John's game. Okay, you're not the Messiah. We get that. That narrows it down a little bit. This guy's not the Messiah. Are you Elijah? No. Are you the prophet? No. The authorities aren't just playing 20 questions with this guy. You remember last week, and for a couple of weeks, we've talked about apocalypticism, about the ancient idea that this world has traveled so far down the wrong track that the only way to fix it is to wipe it out and start over. The system is so corrupt that we have to reboot and return to the original configuration. Well, the Jewish apocalyptics at Jesus' time and at John's time knew that the Hebrew Scriptures said that Elijah was going to return before the last day. And they knew that it said that a prophet would arise to warn the people before the day of the Lord, before the end. So anybody who was looking for the end was looking for Elijah and looking for a prophet. And let's be clear about this. The wilderness around Jerusalem was lousy with messiahs. The desert was full of would-be prophets, would-be Elijahs. I mean, any kook who could get together a hair shirt and a leather belt was out there saying that the end was near. So the authorities find this wild man in the desert, dressed in camel hair and a leather belt, baptizing people in the river. It's not unreasonable that they would ask, okay, which one do you say you are? If you're not saying you're the Messiah, you must be saying that you're Elijah, or you must be saying that you're the prophet. We get it. We know the script. You can kind of imagine the kind of weary, jaded police officer who's just brought in somebody wearing tights and a cape. Okay, what are you supposed to be, Superman? All right, you're not Superman. What is it, Green Lantern, Spider-Man? What are you? But John refuses to cop to being to any of these usual suspects. They ask him, okay, if you're not the Messiah and you're not Elijah and you're not the prophet, then I give up. What do you say about yourself? They've given up on who are you. Who are you got them nowhere. So now they're saying, what do you say about yourself? Who are you claiming to be? And what does John say about himself? I am the voice of one crying out in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord. I am the voice. He doesn't say, I'm the one crying out. He says, I am the voice of one crying out. I am the voice because this message comes from way beyond me. I'm the voice because who I am matters a lot less than what I say. I'm the voice. I'm the voice because all that matters is that you hear what I'm saying. All that matters is that you see this light. In all of these denials and double negatives and this backward conversation, all these ways that John insists on who he is not, if you think about it, John is defining himself in terms of Christ. And every time he says, I am not, he is defining himself in terms of the I am that is Christ. Every time he says, I am not the Messiah, I am not Elijah, that is because he is saying who he is relative to Jesus. The authorities are all hung up on the costume and the baptizing and hung up on what they expect to see, on who they expect John to claim to be. But John is saying, the only important thing about me is that I am the voice that tells you to pay attention to Christ. John is saying, the only important thing about me is that something about Christ has been revealed to me. The only important thing about me is that I am the one who can see what is happening and can tell you about it. John's saying, pay attention. What is wrong with you people? John is saying, the Messiah is right here among you. Why can't you see him? John is saying, the light is shining in the darkness. Uncover your eyes so you can see it. The world is always willing to label people, to put them in a box. The Messiah, Elijah, the prophet, Superman, Spider-Man, Green Lantern. We're trying to put people in a box so that we know we can limit them. We know what they are and we can dismiss them. This world asks the church, who are you? What do you say about yourself? They might say, well, I see candles, I see an altar, I see a priest in a white robe. You guys must be Catholic, right? Okay, not Catholic? Well, I hear you talk a lot about justice and social issues and mission. You must be a bunch of liberals, right? Who do you say that you are? Episcopalians? What's that? Isn't that the rich white people's church? It's easy for us to let ourselves be defined by the way we dress, by the way our priests dress, to let ourselves be defined by the kind of music we play when we're worshiping, or how much water we use when we baptize. We can let the world define us that way. And it's easy to define ourselves by what we're not, by what we don't claim to be. But this Advent season, as we cover our ears from that commercial din so that we can hear the voice in the wilderness, this Advent, as we shield our eyes from all the Christmas lights so that we can see the light of Christ, this Advent, let's remember that our identity only really shows in the light of Christ. Who we are is defined by our relationship with Christ. So this Advent season, let's remember that who we are, as important as that is, who we are as individuals, who we are as a community, who we are as a church, is less important than the good news that we have to share with the world. We are a voice. Who we are is the message we have to give. The most important thing about us is that something about Christ, something important, has been revealed to us. The most important thing about us is that we have the opportunity to reveal something about Christ to the world. The most important thing about us is that we are the voice that tells the world to pay attention to Christ. We are the voice that tells the world, Jesus is right here among you. Can't you see him? We're the voice that tells the world the light is shining in the darkness. For heaven's sake, uncover your eyes. See it. Amen.